Good morning. Wait just a minute before we get started. Let folks pile in to the webinar. People are continuing to join, so just get started in just a moment. Looks like our numbers have evened out. Good morning, and thank you for joining us today. And welcome to Regulation Navigation, brought to you by ITS. This is a webinar series centered around regulation-related topics that cover high-level compliance requirements and give an opportunity for you to learn something new, validate what you may already know, and ask questions affecting your operations. I'm Chris Taylor, ITS Vice President of Learning and Product. And our conversation today will be on pipeline safety management systems, or as we all know it as PSMS, where we will discuss if one day it could become required by law. We'll hit on PSMS basics, we'll identify tools on how to get started on your PSMS journey and manage that journey with our friends from the American Petroleum Institute. We'll also touch on some of the latest regulatory news for our industry in just a moment. But before we get started, some housekeeping items to ensure this experience is beneficial for all of you. This session will be recorded, and as a gentle reminder, the information and views expressed in this webinar series may be opinion and do not constitute legal advice and should not be utilized as your only source of information. Please review the disclaimer on the screen before acting on any advice given and seek guidance from legal counsel or other applicable experts if you have particular questions, issues, or concerns. We'll have time at the end of this session where you can anonymously ask questions about the topics we discussed today. Please type your questions into the Q&A feature in Zoom, and we'll address those as time permits or respond to you through email after, as long as you leave your contact information with your question. Also, we are now offering 0.1 CEUs or continuing education units. You may be able to apply to your professional development hours. So after the webinar, we'll be sending out a feedback form that you can fill out and return it to us if you'd like a certificate for those CEU credits. So first, we're going to begin with an update on regulations, starting with a few recent announcements from PHMSA. Not a regulation in this case, but yesterday, PHMSA, or the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, published a proposal in the Federal Register for new categorical exclusions under the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA, to streamline their review process for actions typically having no significant environmental impact. And PHMSA is requesting public comments on their proposal, and those are due in by January 9th. And as we love to encourage on this program and in our industry, this is a great opportunity to voice your opinion, to be a part of rulemaking processes. And I think this may be a good opportunity for PHMSA possibly to streamline some of their processes to get excluded from some of the NEPA requirements. In other news, recently, PHMSA has determined that the minimum annual percentage rate for random drug testing for covered employees will be 50% during next year, during the calendar year of 2025. For this year's reporting, though, they are also requiring multi-factor authentication for logging in order to submit drug and alcohol testing data into the Drug and Alcohol Management Information System, or the DAMIS database. So be aware of that. Some security requirements now required. Also, last month, PHMSA issued an advisory bulletin on inline inspection tools and analysis. They highlighted the importance for operators to evaluate their pipeline facilities for the existence and potential threat of hard spots in the pipe body. That susceptibility comes from the plate and the pipe manufacturing and is broader than previously understood. So recent data and incident investigations indicate that hard spots could affect multiple pipelines manufactured prior to 1970. And hard spots, if not identified and mitigated, they pose a threat to the integrity of the pipeline from threats such as coating degradation or soil chemistry or increased hydrogen exposure, which can result in hydrogen-induced cracking. So pipeline owners and operators, please consider this in your integrity management programs. In other news, our friends at the American Public Gas Association put together the timeline you see on screen. And we've covered this, some of this rulemaking throughout 2024, throughout this year. And you can kind of see where these two notice of proposed rulemakings are at in the overall rulemaking process. Again, thanks to APGA and Aaron Carilla for putting this together for the industry to kind of keep track of what's going on. The safety rule is currently awaiting a next GPAC meeting, and that's expected to be held next year. And this is where GPAC is where industry, public, and government experts all meet to review and hear public comment and make recommendations for PHMSA to consider around feasibility and practicability of the rulemaking. The leak detection and repair rule, or LDAR, as we commonly refer to it as, may or may not become official regulation in January 2025. There are still many unknowns of what will happen next, especially with the administration change, et cetera. But the last we've heard a few weeks ago, it continues to be under review at the Office of Management and Budget. That could have changed, in the recent times. But predictions continue that a final rule will be published next month. So more to come. We'll be watching that. And finally, the National Transportation Safety Board, or NTSB, has released a preliminary report on a house natural gas explosion in Utah last month that claimed the life of one person, destroyed a home, and displaced several other nearby residents. Investigation findings included the operator found a leak about 150 feet from the home on a 4-inch diameter Aldol A main that was operating below MAOP, or maximum allowable operating pressure, which was in the main was manufactured and installed in the 70s. The operator detected the subsurface gas between the main and two other neighboring residences, with the subsurface gas reaching up to 250 feet from the leak source. And preliminary information indicates none of the 5 residents in the area reported smelling gas before the explosion, and the NTSB is continuing to investigate that incident. They're focusing on the operator's integrity management program, the emergency response procedures, their public awareness program, and the pipeline safety management system. Moving to today's topic, pipeline safety management systems. And we had a little bit of admittedly clickbaity a title for and subject for today. Could PSMS one day become required by law? With me is American Petroleum Institute's Colin Frazier and Laurie Knape. Thanks for being here, y'all. Colin Frazier is API's Director of System Programs. He's based in Houston, Texas. Colin manages API's PSMS third-party assessment program, as well as the Process Safety Site Assessment Program, or referred to as PSSAP. Prior to this role, Colin has worked as a policy advisor at API and has held various health and safety environmental roles at BP. Laurie Knape is API's program manager for pipeline safety management systems, also based in Houston, where she manages the PSMS third-party assessment program. And prior to this role, Laurie worked as an EHS manager for both operators and contractors. Again, thank you for joining us. I'm excited to talk to you today about PSMS, and we're here to learn. The basic premise of pipeline safety management systems is integrating or transforming a company's safety culture to focus on continuous improvement through the guidance of taking four main actions. And there's a lot more to it, but taking the four main actions of plan, do, check, and act. And when we talk about changing a company's culture in this regard, we're talking about changing attitudes and behaviors and ultimately outcomes. The PSMS recommended practice sets out 10 elements that help guide and organize all of the requirements through this safety planning and implementation process. So I want to start out with a question. What's so important about the industry adopting PSMS?
So thanks, Chris, and thanks for everyone joining today. I too was a little clickbaited by the title of this, Chris. So I appreciate getting people in the door and having more conversations about what we're trying to do here. So it's having a pipeline safety management system is really just a fancy way of saying that you need a coordinated way that you're thinking about safety, and how do your policies and the things you do every day keep safety at the forefront so that everyone goes home safe at the end of the day. Because we work with our friends, our neighbors, everyone out there in the front lines. I was the HSC site lead offshore on a platform in the Gulf of Mexico. So I know that camaraderie on at the front lines of where oil and gas is produced and transferred. So it's really about that safety commitment to try and coordinate your activities to these specific kind of standards that already exist in industry. So really what this is about is taking what other industries have already learned and try and bring it into pipeline in the same spirit, but really being more focused on how it affects the pipeline industry specifically. So, for instance, offshore, they have the SEMS program. There are several other examples of management systems. Aerospace was one of the first, and the commercial airline associations were very instrumental in that. And Laurie and I really view our role as trying to bring people together to have the conversation about kind of what are the big pieces that you have to put together and learn from to make sure you don't have the same mistake as this other operator or this other contractor in the next town over or a few miles away. There are still significant injuries in industry. And Laurie and I really just think of this as a mechanism to help industry focus on how to prevent those big things from happening. So also, we're here because pipeline SMS has come up in a number of regulatory conversations, hence your title, Chris. So that's great. And it's really because PHMSA has been involved in this from the beginning, the pipeline regulator. They were a part of the committee that sat with our experts and experts from the public as well to really think through what a safety management system, a beneficial one, could look like for pipeline operators. So the idea that it's just now on their radar is not true. It's just starting to find its way into official publications and starting to become more a part of the vernacular. I will say that PHMSA has said numerous times in public that they have no interest in incorporating 1173 by reference. The problem is that they don't really get to decide that. That's Congress. So if Congress says, write pipeline management system, quote unquote, into regulation, PHMSA has to do that. And so we're just cautiously trying to push these programs because PHMSA has also said, to your title, we might be one big event away from that being the reality we live in. I will be remiss to say up front, API right now does not support incorporating 1173 by reference as an organization. I don't either. And really, I'll just have one little vignette about that. And that is The second you make it the regulation, it's the race to the bottom of what compliance looks like
Right.
for pipeline safety management systems. And that really goes against the core principle of SMS, which is plan, do, check, act, right? You're supposed to be continually improving and continually improving. And, having a quote compliance program is very different than having an internal continuous improvement program. So that's just my little shtick from the get-go about kind of where we are, and really happy to be a part of this discussion today. Laurie, I'll throw it over to you for any opening comments as well.
Thank you, Colin. I don't know why my camera's not working. I keep
Oh, it is
trying.
now.
Oh, it is? Oh, okay, because
It
I
is.
can't see myself. Okay, great. I was like, oh no. No, and I agree. And one of the things that we have found as we've been going through and doing these assessments over the past few years is that the industry is so open to this the way it stands now, because we're giving feedback and we're giving guidance and we're giving advice rather than, like you say, Colin, where it's a mandatory check in the box. We're not going to sit there and say, show me your document that gives me this. And, for me, for my assessors, they're a very chatty group and they're incredible, seasoned industry professionals, and they have a lot to chat with you about. So at this point in time, it is still a conversation, but that's a great way to handle it, right? That's a really great way to handle it rather than it being a task that you have to do. It's a process that you want to do, and that's a big difference.
Right. And Laurie, I'll just tack on to say, for those who may be in the audience thinking about what it takes to even start this process, that's also what Laurie and I do. We create kind of tools and help industry meet you where you are and find you the right advice at the right time, because we know this is a journey. And I will say, if things become regulation, it often becomes this requirement is equal to this requirement.
Right.
And in pipeline SMS, that's just not how risk works. That's not how we mitigate some of those key safety things and prioritize them over a laundry list of kind of check the box compliance items.
Yep.
And yeah, thank you. Speaking of Congress, a recent PHMSA report to lawmakers called PSMS vital for the safe operation of pipelines, and summarized findings from a voluntary industry survey that PHMSA conducted, which found larger operators are more likely to be engaged in PSMS, smaller operators less likely, and some more information in that report. But what are your observations about the report?
That's really great. So we actually hosted NTSB to have a conversation with the pipeline SMS industry team, which, for those who are not aware, it is an allied group of 8 trade associations that are working together across the industry, no matter what piece or part you maybe touch, to make sure that we're speaking the same language. And I think NTSB appreciated the audience of who we gather to have these conversations. And so, yes, they did flat out say that they really love the management system approach, and that's evidenced by them including the actual words in these reports coming out. However, I will like to caveat that to say that I do think the government writ large is really new to what management system objectives seek to do, without getting lost in the 234 shall statements, for instance. So it's not about that. It's about, the second you become the regulator of something, there's an inherent, we're not on the same, this isn't a one team approach, because you're going to now cite me for things that you view not on your list of compliance items. So I just think that we're really honestly in its infancy. Something that I don't think people talk enough about is that management systems, like we say, is a journey. But the reason why we say that is because a very robust management system takes usually decade or more timeline to really instill with a large operator's operations, depending on how big that scope of work is. However, that's the point. It's about finding what is priority first and aligning those pieces so that you're covering the pieces of your business that have a risk component to it. And it really can honestly be as simple for a small operator is, hey, twice a year, this group of people is getting together and we're going to talk about risk. And this is how we're going to talk about risk. It's supposed to be scalable. And we talk often about that in 1173. And so I would also say before I turn it over to Laurie is that people often think this is wholly different than what they're already doing. My bet is that you are doing 80% of what you would already need to quote unquote do in a safety management system. The other 20% is connecting the dots between those programs to make sure that they're learning from one another, that the processes aren't operating in silos, and that we're safer as a result of sharing and learning from one another. So Laurie,
and that's, well, Colin, that's absolutely correct, because there's nothing that says you have to have a PSMS document. You just have to have in your own management system, if you choose to just kind of integrate them, which is fine, you just have to have a mapping of where 1173 meets what you're already doing. And like we say, we're not anything new and unique. We're a very big standard, not as in that we write standards, but it's just a standard way of working that you're already doing it. We just need to kind of give you that guidance and have you map it to it. And one of the things about the Pipeline SMS group, for those in the audience that may not know, as Colin mentioned, this is a group of very diverse industry experts that volunteer their time to come in and have conversations and talk about what do we want for industry as a whole? And it's everything. It's operators, it's contractors, it's service providers. And when we're looking at the small operators, it's municipalities. You can't really get much smaller than a municipality, because even though they are technically an operator, it may be one person. So we really have input from everybody. And that's the thing about what we do, is it is input, it's collaboration. And we talk and we discuss it and we decide collectively with all of these different operating agendas and like you say, Colin, objectives and goals, to come to one that will satisfy the needs of the industry as best as we can.
Yeah, and Chris, the only thing I would happen to say, very specific to your point about the PHMSA report, I do think the data analysis piece of that report is very interesting, just in trying to come up with a number for even us to use, for instance, to understand what size operator we should be targeting with our supporting materials and how we go to them. And I think we might be talking about this in a second, but it also is why API in 1173's second edition, which is currently being worked behind the scenes, we are focusing on potentially having small operator guidance in the standard itself. So we take the point very well that the bigger guys are coming into the fold, and that smaller operators should really be our targets for trying to get to understand that an SMS is scalable. You don't have to do all of the minutia that a huge operator is doing because you physically can't. So we understand that this has to be a conversation about what the right size management system is right for the operations.
Agreed.
That makes sense. And yeah, we will be talking about that a little bit more later. A recent NTSB safety bulletin noted that without full commitment from the pipeline industry to implement a mature PSMS, which Colin, you just mentioned, can take upwards of over a decade to really get honed in and running within a larger operator. Pipeline accidents are going to continue to occur. Again, that's NTSB saying that. And the industry will not be able to meet their goal of zero accidents, fatalities, and serious injuries. So they really are, chalking up a lot to what PSMS can do for the prevention of accidents and fatalities. The NTSB, though, they fall short of calling for regulation as well. Do you agree?
Chris, I think that's a great point. And what I would say is, I think it's too early to have that conversation. we are just now getting to the point as an industry where we are trying to more robustly share the good practices that have been implemented over the past few years as operators have matured on this journey of implementing the 234 should and shall statements in 1173. But I will say about this bulletin, accidents will continue to occur. And SMS is a way to target the risk to make sure the big accidents don't happen. Because, in a world where there are always going to be limited resources, we have to make sure that the catastrophic events are mitigated, but while also understanding, pipelines are the safest way to transport products in this country, kind of statistically over traditional means of transportation. Mm-hmm. So we also want to understand, like we are really driving that needle forward on trying to prevent incidents. And, I'd be happy to be, a cheerleader for the pipeline industry and what they've done on safety, just from a delivery of product perspective. And the safety record is honestly better than the media would make you believe it to be, for sure.
And one of the things about, like with the accidents continue to occur, that's any industry, right? I mean, we try to keep everything as safe as we possibly can, but when you look at the amount of pipe, thousands and thousands of miles of pipe that flow through this country, it's amazing. And one of the things about, will it be become regulation? Like Colin had said, there's just not enough data yet, and we don't want to react. We want to have something that's a positive and not a reaction. So if you look at history, it's usually a minimum of like 10 years. OSHA went into effect in 1970. They really didn't start citations until 1980. 1173 was published in 2015. We haven't even met that 10-year mark yet. And in the middle of that, we had COVID, where nobody could go anywhere or do anything. So the collection of data and the gathering of the data, there's just not enough there yet in order to determine where this needs to go. However, as everybody keeps saying over and over again, right? PHMSA and TSB, they are the only ones that know what's going to happen with this. The rest of us can speculate, but it obviously ultimately is up to them.
Yeah, and Chris, I would just be remiss if I didn't say Laurie and I are not on our policy teams. So our colleagues Sam Menifee and Dave Merck in policy certainly get the final say on how we react to any potential government actions in the pipeline industry. As Laurie said, we're kind of just speculating here, understanding how that conversation is going to play out. But I would say the pipeline SMS industry team is really trying to bridge the gap and be a safe space for the conversation around what does progress look like, because we all have the same goal, and that is preventing pipeline incidents from occurring.
And that's the phenomenal thing about the industry team being so diverse of all the operations, right? You've got your excavators there that are digging, you've got your operators that are producing and transferring. So you're getting everybody's viewpoint. And that's the really great thing about that, is having all stages of the pipeline cycle covered. And as we know, information trickles down. So those members of the pipeline team are going to take what they learn and go to their companies and go to their friends and their colleagues. So it's a great method of communication.
I want to touch on, we stated this a moment ago, PSMS is not a new concept. You mentioned aerospace and its successes in that industry. But I want to talk about the origin of PSMS in our industry. Now, it's my understanding that NTSB originally requested API develop this recommended practice. And you just kind of mentioned a little bit about the maturity of the RP, the specific RP. But can you share more about what goes into the process of creating a recommended practice from scratch?
Absolutely, Chris. So first, all of API standards have to be created in what we discuss as our ANSI accredited process. So we get audited by the American National Standards Institute at some frequency. I will defer to my colleague Paula for the particulars of that. However, it's very prescriptive on the collaboration necessary for API to put our stamp on it as a standard for industry. So this is an open process. 1173 had members of the public, had members of government, and had members of industry as well as contractors in the room to have these conversations. And so I don't want to give the audience the impression that just because NTSB said that we should, API must. But we have a specific process of bringing these recommendations, as well as the recommendations from CSB, the Chemical Safety Board as well, to our standards department to really discuss, could we write a standard here? Are we the expert in this area that behooves us to write the standard? Those conversations occur in a very meaningful way. As such, as does the balloting of all of these standards at the end of the process. 1173 in its first round of balloting, I believe, had over 1,500 comments to adjudicate with the standards task group. So, and they have to adjudicate all of them. So, as you can see, it's a robust process. So API, I think, gets a lot of grief, sometimes rightly so, for the timeline that it takes to create some of these. But doing a new standard from scratch in 2 years, involving the number of stakeholders that were included, I think is a feat. And I think it was tested by its durability. And what I mean by that is that, it's 10 years out and we haven't felt the need to immediately change it, to tweak it in some way. It was robust enough to give the industry some breathing room to digest it and start taking those steps towards connecting all these dots for the policies and procedures that they likely already have for the most part. Laurie, what are your thoughts?
No, absolutely agreed. And like we say, we are a consensus standard company. API is the, I don't want to make us not important, but API is the facilitator, the moderator, we're the tiebreaker if we can't come to consensus, but that doesn't usually happen. And the great thing about it being a consensus standard is with the diversity of the team that's creating it, you get a lot of knowledge and experiences that others have gone through to share that wealth and put it into a really strong document.
Yeah, that's just incredible to hear. 2 years, 1,500 comments. I've been a part of some of those, not the PSMS RP, but and it can get really hairy sometimes. Getting to the bottom and getting agreement and getting movement and finalizing. That's a testament to dedication and the industry too. At ITS, we've been hearing a lot from operators, and it seems similar to, really mirroring that PHMSA report to Congress. More larger operators are already into the journey, and many mid-size and smaller have not started. And let's talk about the 10 elements themselves that operators need to take into account for the PSMS. Of the elements, which are on screen now, which in your view are the hardest to implement?
Well, I can answer that one.
I'm gonna give Laurie
I
all.
saw that. You were like,
So for those in the audience, Laurie staffs all the assessments. She is intimately involved with the reports that our our collaborators get, at the end of these. So she sees what's happening on the ground. So I think this is a great time for her.
Yeah. Yeah. And so one of the things that you guys know or may know is that every year, Sam, like Colin had mentioned him earlier, he runs our statistics, and pulling that data from the surveys that we do, he's able to put a list of like the top 5, whether they're having a hard time implementing it or whether they're having a hard time, with conforming to it or whatever. The list stays pretty much the same. It's kind of like OSHA's top 10. Rotates around a little bit, but it's pretty consistent because obviously these are the ones that need a lot more work. One of them obviously is stakeholder engagement. API just rolled out a new stakeholder engagement RP to help and give more guidance on that. Sometimes people don't understand the breadth of stakeholders. They just think that it's maybe their investors or perhaps it's their employees or something like that, but it's anybody. And that's the almost impossible task, right? I mean, it's absolutely anybody. And nowadays, with concerns for personal safety, you have to be creative and think of how can you get the knowledge out and the awareness out without putting your people or your workers at risk. So those are one thing. Stakeholder engagement is one that we usually kind of have some higher level interest in. And then
Yeah,
safety
and
assurance. No, go
Laurie,
ahead.
just to hop in, that standard is 1185 pipeline public engagement for the
Yep.
audience.
Yep. And then safety assurance, because within safety assurance, that is part of your assessing, your auditing, your culture, and the safety culture part, of course, always trips people up. It's really tricky to figure out the best questions to ask. Sometimes, when you're looking at safety culture, buying 10 canned questions may not really reflect the scope of your work. We've seen sometimes where in the safety culture assessments, they've got like 80 questions, and that's too much. People just get question fatigue. That's absolutely too much. So having that and doing that, on a routine basis is really what's great. And then, of course, obviously, another one is management review and continuous improvement, because again, that's that. What are you doing to get better? What is your check and act? That type of thing there. So out of these, the ones that we find the most in the assessments is going to be stakeholder safety assurance and management review continuous improvement.
Thank you for that insight. So let's take a moment to focus on those operators and contractors who haven't started or don't even know where to get started. Um, does the PSMS journey or the process begin with, let's say, a gap analysis or assessment, or how is API helping organizations in the industry take that first step?
Well, I am incredibly, incredibly proud to be able to offer that API has a variety of tools on the pipeline.sms.org website that we've created with industry that are free. These are free tools. If you don't know what you need, test the waters. If you're small and you don't necessarily have the resources to purchase software right now, go ahead and play around with these. And there's the 4 stages, right? Or 3 stages plus contractor: implementing, planning, and evaluating. And then, of course, we have our new contractor tool. And one of the things that is so great about it, like I say, is that they are free. My word of caution always is that they're software. Excuse me, they're not software, they're a spreadsheet. So if you want to keep that as part of your KPIs, we did an internal assessment 2024. Now we're going to do one 2025. Make sure you save, because it is just a spreadsheet and you won't have that data for KPIs or dashboards or whatever you choose to do with it. And the tools are awesome. They're very, very easy to use.
So, and tell me a little bit more about, that first step, maybe the gap analysis and that tool. Uh,
Sure. So we have our planning tool, and the planning tool, everything is really easy. It's drop downs, answer yes, no, maybe. You can type in, do you have it? Don't you have it? Is there a gap? It wasn't necessary. All of those are already built into it.
okay.
On the implementation tool, where it is your gap analysis tool, we have some suggested language. If you don't know what you should be looking at or what you might need, we have suggested language to give you an idea so that you're looking at the correct thing. There you can see the suggested language is in red, red or blue, and you just go through and you fill all of that, absolutely fill all of that out. And then that way there you can get an idea of where you are, and everything tallies, everything pulls over, everything tallies. So it's really a great thing. And we just follow through the 234 should shall statements in the RP. There's nothing here that's secretive. There's nothing here that's not in the RP. We want it to be as helpful and accurate as we possibly can.
That's very intuitive to me. I mean, you really just broke down all the requirements in the
Mm-hmm.
document and made as simple as you can get
Yep.
a tool within Excel that almost every business uses.
Yep.
Phenomenal. And you make it available for free again
Yes,
at api.org/pipeline-SMS or pipelinesms.org as well.
right.
Your assessment program, so these tools are available for everyone to
Mhm.
use themselves and however they want. But you also have an assessment program you've been mentioning, and I believe it's a tier-based service, and it's determined by operator company size, but you also assess by element. Is that right? Can you tell us more about your assessment program?
Sure. Colin, do you want to talk through this?
Yeah, I'm happy to. Sorry, my video appears to have,
Oh no.
died on me, but I am still here on audio. So really, it's really about our three tiers wanting to meet the industry where they are, right? So what we want to do is give operators and contractors options to assess parts or all of their management system as they would find helpful in their continuous improvement process. And we base, these maturity assessments on the industry maturity model, which you're seeing in front of you. For operators, we really base the three tiers on the size of the assessment that they need by their man hours, essentially. We think that's the fairest way to determine kind of the scope and breadth that a management system covers. So we do small, medium, and large assessments. We also do special municipal or very small operator assessments. But then we have a new offering specifically for the contractor community too. We recognize, contractors hold risk in the industry. Excavating, continues to be problematic, but our colleagues at 811 have made a lot of strides in that space as well. But for contractors, it's really about what do you need? For contractors, we can come in and help you just do the gap analysis. We can target specific programs, or we can do a full assessment for you. And even the full assessment option is only, one assessor at your office for a few days, and you can get a wealth of information back on to improve how you're coordinating safety efforts. But I'm happy to turn it over to Laurie because it is all her who makes those assessments happen. So she knows better than anyone what we're saying and offering to operators and contractors.
Yep, absolutely. And on this particular slide here, just for clarity, because this slide may potentially be a little confusing, you can see where we have conformance and effectiveness separated on the bottom, and that's intentional. You get a scoring 1, 2, 3 on conformance. Are you meeting the requirements of the RP in your written documents? And then are you effective? When we go out into the field, can we show that what you're doing in the office is being translated and communicated properly out into the field? While that does say a 4 and a 5 because it's like step 4 and 5, our scoring on that is just a 1 or a 2. And it's 0, 0.5, 1, 1.5, that type of thing. The reason that API intentionally does not merge their scoring is to be fair and equal and give a better view of how you're doing. Your documents could be awesome. They could be absolutely perfect, letter perfect, explaining everything wonderful. And then when we get into the field, maybe not so much. So we don't want to bring down all your hard work on your written documents and your processes in headquarters. And we also, to be fair to you and really give you a true assessment, we don't want to raise your effectiveness score. How are they actually working in the field and give you a warm, fuzzy feeling that things are going great when maybe they aren't? So we really keep those scores separate, and we feel very strong about that, because of the fact that they can skew the result. We don't ever combine them. And like Colin had mentioned, we have essentially 7 offerings. We have small, medium, and large operator based on man hours. We have small, medium, and large contractor. And then we have, like Colin had mentioned, the very small operator or the municipality, because it's only fair. You can't ask one poor person 55 questions about leadership. They just would be brain dead by the end of the assessment.
I could imagine. At the
Absolutely.
at the ITS user conference a couple months ago in Nashville, Tennessee, Laurie, you were there and presented on PSMS, and thank you again for doing that. We heard from a large multi-state operator on, and really the detail of their successful strategy in implementing PSMS into their operations, and where, in their words, they infused the PSMS elements into every single team, assigned champions to each one of those elements within their existing teams, as opposed to creating a specific role or even a department to be in charge of and kind of reign over PSMS. And they spoke, a lot about how that was so effective for them. Is that the more common approach, or where do you see operators having the most success? Or where do you see different strategies working based on the company size or other factors? Tell me a little bit more about, how organizations are finding success.
So we find a variety of everything, as you can imagine, because like you say, it depends upon the size of the organization. If
Okay.
you're a major operator, you probably have 300 safety professionals and 500 lawyers that can review all of this, as to where if you're an operator that has, 200 miles of pipe, it may be three of you. Just because you're an operator and not a contractor doesn't mean that you're not small. One of the things that we do find a little consistent is having element owners, because so many times these are bonus jobs, as I like to call them. So we find that they do separate the elements out to different departments based upon what that department is responsible for. And it just makes sense. They're overseeing it. And then they report back to a core team. They may report back to, like a steering committee. And then that's really beneficial, because then that steering committee can take that data and provide that information at higher level top management meetings, so the top management is aware of it as well. So it's a really great communication, a tiering even for that. Your folks that are managing those elements, and then they report up to the steering committee to make sure nothing gets forgotten and everything is done. And then they report up to top management to make sure that they have a full view of everything. But there is no right or wrong. It just, like you say, it just depends upon how your company is structured.
Yeah, so it's find the right path for you is what I'm hearing.
Mm-hmm.
API, we talked about this very beginning. You're working currently on the second edition of 1173. It's expected to publish next year, I believe.
Correct.
And I know that, Colin mentioned the probability of having guidance for smaller operators. What does that look like, or what can we expect in the second edition?
So one of the things that we're working on, and again, nothing has been signed and stamped. This is still a in process, but we are working with other industry associations, because we collaborate with everybody. We have no secrets. And we are creating a small operator annex. And we're looking at that as to what they would need to do to map to the 234 should shall statements. Yes, operators have to adhere to everything, regulatory wise, or, whatever the situation may be. They still have to meet the same requirements, but their language can be different. And in order to make sure that it's understood, we are using those other industry associations and hearing how their customers, how their membership talks and what language resonates with them. Because, like I say, we don't do anything that's tricky. We're not trying to write a legal brief here. We're trying to write something that's understandable and usable.
Mhm.
So we really rely on them to share with us the language and how things really work for that smaller operator. So at this point, we are working on a small operator annex for 1173, and I expect it to go through.
Yeah, but not a sealed deal.
Never.
ITS created a PSMS e-learning training course library in partnership with GTI Energy and industry experts that delivered a series of narrated interactive experiences for employees at all levels, from leadership to the field, that introduces the PSMS concepts and its importance, and then details the elements. What, in your view, what kind of value do these types of training programs provide to organizations who are implementing a PSMS program or already have implemented?
So we have found these to be incredibly beneficial. And API has its own learning environment, right? We have our own learning platform. And we had a learning platform for 1173 with all of the elements. Last year, the pipeline SMS team came back and said, we would like a learning environment for contractors, what they need to know, or no, excuse me, not contractors, field level workers, whether it's an operator, whether it's a contractor, which of the elements out of 1173 did they feel was most important? So again, they came to us and they said to us, we like these 6 elements for field level workers. So as a companion to the 1173, we made the field level worker. And I'm sure that you have the same, well, I don't know, but I would assume, Chris, that you have the same offering, that what we've done with ours is we've made it available that they can bolt on their own like CEO message to say the importance of PSMS and to say the importance of safety within the organization, so that they can't customize the slides, but they can definitely add on to it. And that is so great because, especially when you're looking at the contractor community, they work for a lot of operators, a lot of operators. So if they're getting these trainings, whether it's part of their onboarding or whether it's part of their annual refreshers or whatever, it just builds that muscle mass of the same message. So no matter where they go, they've got that same foundation. And that's the really big thing, right? Because that's with 1173. It gives the foundation, and then obviously companies, based on their scope of work and their risk, add on to that. And that's what these learnings do. And I think that they're awesome. And again, I don't know how yours functions. I'm not even sure how mine functions. But so many with us adult learners, well, not so much the adult learners, but definitely the younger kids, the micro learning, right? Where they can do it in bits and pieces here and again, and so portable. I mean, I think that that's the big thing too, is the portability, that they can do it on a tablet or on their iPhone or, wherever they are when they've got a couple of minutes. That's the really great part about this, is that it gets the message out to a much bigger audience than we used to be able to do. Pulling people out of the field to go to a classroom is a big expense to a company. It's a big expense to a company.
Yeah, the more you can make learning accessible,
Yep.
And in various forms, and personalized, like you mentioned,
Yep.
so effective. Well, thank you so much, Laurie and Colin, for sharing your expertise. And audience, it's we're coming up on time. It's time to enter any questions you may have in the Q&A chat feature or the Q&A feature in Zoom. Note, if we run out of time to answer your question, we'll be sure to follow up with you after the webinar, as long as you give us your contact information. Now, as we do on this program, we're going to recap our 5 main takeaways. So takeaway number 1, look at adopting PSMS as a good business endeavor for now, but we could be another incident away from prompting Congress to make PHMSA pass a law. And I think it's really important. We saw at the very beginning of the program the rulemaking process. We will see this, if this were to come to bear, we would see this from miles and miles away, years away, typically in those processes. So takeaway number 2, you don't have to start PSMS from scratch. There are tools and there are assessment services widely available, and they're maturing. And number 3, you need to find the right PSMS fit for your company to make it work. Takeaway number 4, expect a second edition of the API Recommended Practice 1173 next year in 2025 that will have additional guidance, expected to have additional guidance for small operators. I'm so excited about that for our industry. And takeaway number 5, PSMS training is required by the recommended practice. So don't forget about the opportunity for obtaining continuing education credits. So we're going to be sending out a feedback form following this webinar. If you fill that out, you return it to us, you can get a certificate for those CEU credits. And as we mentioned earlier, ITS collaborated with industry experts and GTI Energy to create a training series for pipeline safety management systems. These are interactive, fully narrated online training modules emphasizing the importance of continuous improvement and outlining safety processes that will empower your workforce with knowledge, and whether that's leadership or operators or contractors or at the field level. And you can successfully implement a PSMS process. This is one of the tools. API mentioned they have learning tools as well. So, lots and lots of avenues to find success here. Now, this time we'd like to talk through some of your questions that we've been getting. If you haven't done so yet, you can enter yours into the Q&A feature. And we just have a few minutes. So first question, what will, as a contractor, should suppliers require their contractors to develop and maintain their own PSMS program? So I guess operators should operators require contractors to develop and maintain?
It's a great question, Chris, and I know checking those green boxes is important for everyone already, and that's not really the point of this in any way, shape, or form. I mean, as a little vignette, I would say I've sat in many a contractor review meeting where people are struggling to find safety topics of interest. This is more about all speaking the same language and understanding what a management system for safety looks like for your specific organization. And that's entirely dependent upon your scope of work. So I would just encourage you to think about it less as this, huge check the box list, and more, how do we as an organization deal with safety? And this is just a structured way of doing that. So we are all about the spirit of continuous improvement. And that's what this is about, not requiring, someone to have done this or have one of this on paper prescriptively as a right to do business. No, like we said, these take a long time to really get off the ground. And so we're here to help people start, that process.
Here's a good question. So what is the panel's thoughts on the PSMS program conceptually in line with, I think you touched on this earlier, but I guess the question is trying to ask, what are your thoughts with following the program to the T or very prescriptively versus how an operator or a contractor finds it fits their organization? Do you have to do everything prescriptively? I think is the question.
So I will.
Oh, go ahead,
Laurie. The only thing I'll say with this is that I think people are still in the mindset that to do one of these requirements, you have to do X, Y, Z, T laundry list of things, when in reality, you could do one thing that fulfills any number of the requirements of RP 1173 and the guidance we produced. So just like if it says you need to have a procedure for this, that doesn't say it needs to be a 15-page point by point by point by point sort of procedure, unless the risk assessment dictates that that's what is necessary to maintain safety. The point is to have those conversations about what keeps people safe and how to keep people open enough to reporting things that they view as unsafe, and any number of kind of the hot principles that are broadly being talked about now in industry also. So Laurie, but I'm sure Laurie, you have some more specifics here too.
Well, one of the things about 1173 is that it's not prescriptive. It's risk-based. What do you need to do to, remove or mitigate or eliminate your risk? That's what it's all about. We're not telling you, how to do it. We're telling you what you possibly should have in order to do it. So following 1173 is good guidance. And one of the things that I can't emphasize enough, because like we said before, will this become regulation someday? When? Who knows? But we do know that when this is now a final rule and it is regulation, the government will give you X amount of time to become compliant before their audits start. And they will be an audit. They will not be an assessment like what we do. So my suggestion and my hope is that people will use our tools or anybody's tools to try and map where they are to 1173 and get ahead of that curve, get ahead of when something happens, because when it does become a regulation someday down the road, you're already going to be there. It's not going to be this major shifting gears and big investment. You can just kind of chip away, chip away, chip away at it as you go through. And it's only to the benefit of not only your company, but others' companies and our communities as well. Because if we're all walking in one direction, we're all getting there safer.
Thank you so much for your time and expertise, Colin and Laurie. Thank you to our audience for joining us today. Please mark your calendar for our next regulation navigation webinar, which is tentatively scheduled in March, Wednesday, March the 12th. So stay tuned for more on that, and please stay safe out there. Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye. Thank you
Thank
for
you,
joining us.
everyone.